John Bridge moved to Sunderland in 1963 when he became Director of Education for Sunderland Borough Council. After spending 13 years helping to shape the city by managing its education, Mr. Bridge retired in 1976. He continued to live in Sunderland for a further 30 years until he died in 2006 at the age of 91. I've spent most of my working life in Sunderland, and so have often heard about the various pop stars and sports stars and TV personalities associated with the city, of whom we are so justly proud. But I had never heard of John Bridge, and only learned of his existence about 10 years ago, when I was sat on a bench near the Cat and Dog Steps at Roker Seafront. At that time the bench had a small plaque on it, one which has now gone, dedicated to Mr. Bridge's memory. The plaque said that John Bridge had been Sunderland's Director of Education and that he'd loved to walk along its coast. The plaque also listed a string of letters after his name, so I decided to look him up. And this is what I found out. As a young man, John Bridge studied at King's College, London, and in 1937 was awarded a physics degree. He then trained as a teacher, but found it hard to find a job. He obtained temporary work at a private school, but was not offered a permanent post because he was not an Oxbridge man. And then, just as he had finally found a permanent teaching position at a state school in Sheffield, World War II broke out. Mr. Bridge joined the Navy and, after a few days' training, started work in Plymouth, defusing bombs and mines. The training Mr. Bridge had received had been excellent. However, constant innovations in bombs and mines, including all kinds of new and ingenious mechanisms to prevent people from defusing them without being booby-trapped or otherwise blown up, meant that most of his learning had to be done on the job. In Plymouth, Mr. Bridge narrowly escaped being killed several times, including 3 times in one day. He was awarded 2 George medals for his work there. He was also injured when demonstrating how to set an incendiary bomb to explode, after putting it in sandbags and retiring to a safe distance. Mr. Bridge set the bomb to explode in about 3 minutes and retired. Nothing happened, so after 5 minutes he went over to have a look. The bomb then exploded, but luckily his injuries were light, and after a week in hospital he returned to work. Once lit, do not return to the firework. Everyone knows that. If Mr. Bridge is going to make elementary mistakes of this type, you might think, he will not last long. In fact, this was the only injury that Mr. Bridge received during the war, even though he went on to defuse hundreds more bombs. John Bridge survived for 2 reasons. First, he had a superb understanding of practical physics. This enabled him to interpret the various mechanisms at play, magnetic, sonic, clockwork, electrical, in new types of bomb and mine. He also did things his own way. If there was a set procedure for approaching something, and Mr. Bridge thought it was better to do things differently, he did things differently. In this sense, he was a maverick. The most astounding instance of John Bridge's maverick brilliance was when he cleared the mines at Messina Harbour in Sicily in 1943. The harbour was key to supporting the invasion of the Italian mainland, but it had been mined by the retreating Nazis in a particularly lethal way. 5 brave bomb disposal experts had been killed, and 2 more had been injured trying to make safe the mines. It was then that John Bridge and 2 Navy divers were called in. Mr. Bridge, however, did not agree with the way that the Navy divers did things and told them to stay in the boat. Then, over the course of 3 days, he dived down himself in a diving helmet and thick spectacles, he was short-sighted, and cleared every single mine from the harbour. No one quite knows how Mr. Bridge did this. It is rather like the children's story, A Fish Out of Water, when Otto the goldfish has turned into a fish the size of a whale, and Mr. Carp, the pet shop owner, arrives with a bag of tools, dives into the water and does something mysterious that turns him back into a little goldfish. What John Bridge did in Messina Harbour was amazing. The Navy divers, who were meant to call Mr. Bridge Sir, but didn't, started calling him Sir, and he was awarded the George Cross. John Bridge went on to give more outstanding service in the war, including rescuing a vital supply bridge at Nijmegen from a mine. But after Messina, it was decided to stop awarding him medals. He had got enough already. The Second World War was fought by people of heroic bravery, like our fighter pilots. It was fought by people of remarkable brilliance, like our codebreakers. John Bridge was unusual, however, in being both incredibly brave and remarkably brilliant. Then, after the war, he lived for almost half his life in Sunderland. This, then, is the man who was once commemorated by a plaque on a bench at Roker, a plaque that has now gone.